Welcome to Buddha's Healing, a quiet place where we gently explore the wisdom of the Buddha and learn how to care for the heart, calm the mind, and live with greater peace in everyday life. Dear friends, there comes a moment in life, often sometime after 50, when many people begin feeling a quiet kind of exhaustion. Not always dramatic, not always easy to explain, just heavy. The body feels tired, sleep becomes lighter. The mind feels crowded, joy feels harder to reach, and perhaps without fully understanding why. Life begins feeling heavier than it once did. Many people assume this is simply aging. This is what happens after 50. They say, my energy just isn't the same anymore. My body is changing, and yes, the body does change. The Buddha gently reminded us that all things in life are impermanent. Youth changes, strength changes, health changes, relationships change, seasons change. Nothing stays exactly the same forever. This is not failure. This is simply life unfolding. But dear friends, here is something many people quietly overlook. Not every kind of exhaustion comes from age. Sometimes, the body feels tired because the heart has been carrying too much for too long. Invisible things, emotional things, heavy things, things no one else sees, old pain, fear, pressure, regret, unspoken sadness, the need to stay strong, the need to keep everyone else okay. The habit of carrying burdens that were never fully put down, and over time, the heart grows tired. Then the body follows. Have you ever noticed this? Some people in their 70s seem deeply peaceful. Their spirit feels light. Their laughter feels real. Even when life is difficult, something about them feels calm. And then there are people much younger who already seem exhausted, emotionally drained, heavy inside, quickly irritated, always tense, unable to rest. What creates the difference? Sometimes circumstances matter. Of course they do, but often, the deeper difference is emotional weight, because, dear friends, what we carry emotionally shapes how we experience life. The Buddha taught again and again that suffering grows when the mind clings too tightly to pain, to fear, to control, to stories, to expectations, to things that were never meant to stay forever, and perhaps after 50. Many people begin feeling the cost of carrying too much. The cost appears quietly. Sleep becomes harder. Peace feels distant. The chest feels heavy. The nervous system stays restless. Energy fades. Joy becomes interrupted. And many people do not realize why. They simply think, I guess I am getting older, but perhaps the heart is simply exhausted. Exhausted from carrying burdens it no longer needs. Dear friends, please hear this gently. You are not weak for feeling tired. You are not broken. And no, you do not have to carry everything forever. There comes a season in life where wisdom quietly asks a different question. Not, how much more can I handle? But, what am I finally ready to put down? Because perhaps healing after 50 is not about doing more. Perhaps healing begins with carrying less. Less resentment, less fear, less pressure, less regret, less emotional heaviness. Today, we are going to gently reflect on 5 things many people over 50 continue carrying, things that quietly disturb sleep, steal peace, and weigh heavily on the heart. Not to create guilt, not to shame anyone, but to create awareness. Because awareness is where healing begins. Together, we will explore old resentment and emotional pain, constant worry about tomorrow, the pressure to control everything, regret about the past, and finally, one burden so many people quietly carry without realizing it: the weight of other people's expectations and judgments. Perhaps as we reflect today, you may recognize parts of yourself, and if you do, please be gentle. This is not about blame, This is about compassion because, dear friends, most people over 50 have spent decades carrying responsibilities: family, bills, children, loss, work, disappointment, grief. Many people learned how to survive, how to stay strong, how to sacrifice. But very few learned how to emotionally rest, how to soften, how to release, how to stop carrying what no longer belongs in the heart. And maybe this chapter of life is inviting something new, not more struggle, not more pressure, but gentleness. Rest, peace. Maybe healing begins not by fixing everything, but by finally loosening the grip, by whispering softly, "I have carried enough. I no longer want to suffer this way. I deserve peace too." So before we continue, take one slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and gently ask yourself, what burden have I been carrying that no longer belongs in this season of my life? Because sometimes the thing quietly stealing our peace is not life itself. Sometimes it is simply the emotional weight we never realized we were still carrying. Dear friends, let us gently begin with the first burden. Many people continue carrying after 50 often, without realizing how deeply it affects sleep, peace, and emotional well-being. And that burden is old resentment and emotional pain, not fresh pain, not recent disappointment, but the kind of hurt that quietly follows a person for years, sometimes decades. A betrayal never forgotten, a painful divorce, family conflict, a broken friendship. Words spoken in anger that somehow still echo years later, or perhaps a wound no one else even remembers anymore. Yet somehow, the heart still carries it. Please hear this gently. Pain is real. The Buddha never taught people to pretend suffering did not happen. He never asked people to smile through heartbreak or deny disappointment. Pain deserves compassion. Grief deserves kindness. Heartbreak deserves gentleness. But dear friends, there is a quiet difference between experiencing pain and carrying pain long after the moment has passed. Pain visits. Resentment stays. Pain asks for healing. Resentment quietly keeps the wound alive. And over time, that emotional weight begins touching everything: sleep, patience, energy, relationships, peace. Many people after 50 quietly wonder, why do I feel so heavy? Why am I always emotionally tired? Why do peaceful moments still feel interrupted? Perhaps the answer is not always in the body. Perhaps the heart is simply exhausted from carrying old hurt too long. The Buddha once offered a powerful image. Holding anger, he said, is like holding a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. Before it harms another person, it burns the one carrying it, and resentment often works this way. At first it feels protective, justified, necessary. They hurt me, they betrayed me, they should apologize. They ruined something important, and perhaps some of those things are true. Perhaps someone genuinely hurt you. Perhaps life unfolded painfully. But dear friends, today we gently ask a different question. What is carrying this pain costing you now? Because sometimes the suffering of the original moment ends, but emotional replay continues for years. Quietly, daily, inside the mind, inside the body, and eventually, the nervous system becomes tired. Very tired. Main teaching. The Buddha taught again and again that suffering deepens when we cling too tightly. Not because attachment makes us weak, but because gripping keeps the heart tense, guarded, afraid. Heavy and emotional pain is one of the hardest things to loosen. Why? Because hurt becomes familiar. Part of identity. Some people quietly build emotional walls around old wounds. This is why I don't trust. This is why I stay distant. This is why I expect disappointment. And slowly, pain stops being a visitor. It becomes residence, dear friends. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many people think forgiveness means saying, "What happened was okay," but forgiveness does not erase accountability. Forgiveness does not erase memory. Forgiveness simply whispers, "I no longer want this pain controlling my peace." That is all, and perhaps that choice changes more than we realize. Because after 50, peace matters, sleep matters, health matters. Softness matters, the years ahead matter, reflection and explanation. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase everywhere you go. Every room, every season, every relationship. At first, perhaps you barely notice. Eventually, the shoulders ache. Walking feels harder, the body grows tired. Old resentment works the same way. At first, the pain feels understandable. Then it becomes emotional habit, then heaviness, then exhaustion, and perhaps the saddest part. Many people become so used to emotional heaviness, they forget what lightness even feels like. Dear friends, please hear this gently. You do not have to force healing. Healing takes time. You do not have to pretend pain never mattered. It mattered, but perhaps you no longer need to relive the same wound every day, because your peace matters too. Your remaining years matter too. Perhaps tonight, you may quietly ask yourself, what old hurt am I still carrying? Has this pain protected me, or has it quietly exhausted me? Sometimes, healing begins not with dramatic change. Sometimes, healing begins with one honest whisper, "I am tired of carrying this." There was a man named Michael. He was 58 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood outside Sacramento. If you met Michael for the first time, you might think he had a good life, a stable home, a decent retirement plan, 2 grown children, a quiet marriage. Nothing dramatic, nothing obviously wrong, and in many ways, life truly was okay, but quietly, Michael carried something heavy. Something invisible, something he rarely talked about, a resentment he had been holding for nearly 18 years. Toward his older brother, Stephen. The pain began after their father passed away. At first, it was grief. Then came tension, arguments over family responsibilities, misunderstandings about money, old childhood wounds resurfacing. Years of unspoken frustrations finally erupting. One painful afternoon turned into shouting, the kind of argument people never fully forget. Stephen said things Michael never stopped replaying. Michael said things he later regretted. Then came silence. No holidays together, no family vacations, no birthday calls, nothing. At first, Michael told himself he was fine. He crossed the line. I don't need people like that. I am better off without the drama, and perhaps part of that was true. Maybe distance was necessary for a while, but something else quietly happened too. The resentment stayed alive. Year after year, late at night, Michael replayed old arguments, imagined conversations, things he wished he had said. Things he wished Stephen had apologized for, sometimes while driving, sometimes during quiet evenings, sometimes while lying awake at night. And slowly, the emotional heaviness spread. He became more impatient, more irritable, more emotionally distant. Little things bothered him: traffic, noise, family disagreements, unexpected problems. His wife, Corinne, noticed. One evening after dinner, she asked softly, "Can I tell you something?" Michael nodded. "You seem angry all the time lately." The sentence hit harder than he expected, because honestly, he was angry, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, constantly. A low emotional ache he no longer knew how to put down. Months later, during a routine checkup, his doctor reviewed his health. Nothing alarming, but stress levels were elevated. Poor sleep, high blood pressure, fatigue. The doctor paused, then asked gently, "How are you doing emotionally?" Michael laughed awkwardly. "What does that even mean?" The doctor smiled softly. "It means, are you carrying something heavy?" That sentence stayed with him because the answer came quickly. Yes, something heavy, very heavy. Weeks later, Karen invited him to a mindfulness class at a nearby Buddhist center. At first, Michael resisted. Not really my thing. But eventually, mostly to make Karen happy, he agreed. The teacher that evening was calm, simple, no dramatic preaching. Just quiet reflection. At one point the teacher said, "Sometimes people believe holding on to anger keeps them strong." The room became quiet. Then he added, "But often holding on simply keeps the wound alive." Michael sat very still. Then came another sentence. A sentence that somehow landed directly in his chest. "You do not heal by replaying pain. You heal when you stop feeding it every day." Something softened inside him, because for the first time in years, he realized something difficult. The argument with Stephen had lasted one afternoon, but emotionally, he had relived it for 18 years. 18 years, and suddenly, he felt tired, not angry, just tired. Tired of carrying the emotional weight. Tired of replaying conversations that no longer existed. Tired of losing peace to something old. A few days later, Michael found himself scrolling through old contacts. Stephen's number still there. His thumb hovered, stopped, hovered again. Finally, he called. No perfect speech prepared, no dramatic apology. Just one awkward sentence. "Hey," long pause. "It's been a while." Silence. Then Stephen laughed softly. "Yeah, too long." Healing did not happen overnight. There were difficult conversations, awkward moments. Old hurt, tears, honesty, but slowly something changed. Coffee once a month, family dinners again. Small conversations, small moments, human moments, and strangely, Michael changed too. Sleep improved. His patience softened, the tension in his chest eased. Even Karen noticed. One evening she smiled and said, "You seem lighter." Michael laughed quietly. "I think I finally got tired of carrying bricks, and for the first time in years." He meant it. Lesson from the story. Dear friends, perhaps there is a Michael somewhere inside many of us. An old wound, a disappointment, a person we quietly replay in our minds. Please hear this gently. Your pain matters. What happened mattered, but so does your peace. And perhaps after 50, peace matters more than winning old emotional battles. You do not have to force forgiveness. Healing takes time, but perhaps you no longer need to relive the same hurt every single day. Because old resentment often promises protection, but eventually it quietly becomes exhaustion. And heavy things become harder to carry with age. Sometimes healing begins with one simple sentence. "I am tired of suffering this way," and perhaps that quiet honesty becomes the beginning of peace. Dear friends, let us gently move into the second burden. Many people over 50 quietly continue carrying a burden so common that it often feels normal. And that burden is constant worry about tomorrow, not ordinary concern, not healthy planning, but the kind of emotional worry that quietly becomes a habit, a lifestyle, a companion that never fully leaves. After 50, worry changes shape. When we are younger, we worry about work, deadlines, bills, building a future. But later in life, the worries become heavier in different ways: health, aging, money, retirement, children, grandchildren, loneliness, unexpected illness, losing independence, and perhaps one of the deepest fears quietly hidden beneath it all. What happens if life becomes harder than I can handle? Dear friends, please hear this gently. Fear is deeply human. Worry does not mean weakness. It does not mean failure. It simply means the heart is trying to protect itself. The Buddha understood fear. He understood uncertainty. He understood how easily the human mind drifts into imagined suffering. But he also taught something profoundly compassionate. Suffering grows when the mind leaves the present moment and begins living inside imagined futures. How often does this happen? The body sits safely in a quiet room, but the mind travels somewhere frightening. A future illness, financial problems, worst-case scenarios, loneliness, loss, things that have not happened. Things that may never happen, and over time, the nervous system becomes tired, very tired, sleep becomes fragile. Peace becomes interrupted. The body stays tense. Even joyful moments begin feeling incomplete because the mind never fully arrives. Always scanning, always preparing, always asking, what if, what if, what if, what if, dear friends? How exhausting that becomes, to mentally rehearse suffering every single day. And perhaps many people listening today understand this feeling deeply. The body is tired, but the tiredness feels emotional too. Like the mind never truly rests, like peace never fully lands. Today we gently reflect on this question. What is the emotional cost of carrying tomorrow every single day? Main teaching. The Buddha gently reminded people again and again. The future has not arrived. The past has already passed. This moment is where life is actually happening. Not tomorrow, not imagined disasters, not fears the mind creates, just this breath, this room, this ordinary moment. But dear friends, how often do we miss life while preparing for fear? A sunset appears, but the mind worries. Family gathers, but anxiety interrupts. A peaceful evening arrives, but the heart still braces for tomorrow. The truth is, worry often disguises itself as responsibility. People say, I am just being realistic. I am preparing. I care too much not to worry, and perhaps some of that is true, but there is a difference between preparing and emotionally suffering in advance. Preparing is wise. Worry is exhausting. Preparing says, I will do what I can. Worry says, I must mentally carry every possible disaster. Dear friends, the heart was never meant to carry tomorrow all day long. Reflection and explanation. Imagine carrying a suitcase filled with bricks every morning. At first, you adjust, you survive, you keep going, but eventually, the shoulders ache, energy fades, walking feels harder. Worry works this way. At first, it feels responsible, then slowly, it becomes emotional heaviness. And perhaps the saddest part, many people grow so used to worrying, they forget what emotional rest even feels like. They say, I've always been this way. This is just who I am. But dear friends, a lifelong habit does not mean a healthy habit. Peace still matters, rest still matters, softness still matters, especially after 50, because after 50, the body feels emotional stress more honestly. The nervous system becomes less forgiving, and what once felt manageable begins feeling heavy. Perhaps tonight, before sleep, you might quietly place a hand over your heart and whisper, I have carried enough for today. Tomorrow does not need me tonight. This moment deserves my peace. Sometimes, healing begins this gently. One softer breath, one quieter thought, one moment of finally letting the nervous system rest. There was a woman named Linda. She was 56 years old, living in a quiet suburb outside Atlanta with her husband, Mark. Most people described Linda as caring, responsible, the kind of person who always thought ahead, always prepared, always organized. She remembered birthdays, checked in on family constantly, planned for emergencies, helped everyone around her. At first glance, These seemed like beautiful qualities, and in many ways, they truly were, but quietly, something else had grown underneath all that caring. Worry, constant worry. The kind that never truly rested. When her children were young, Linda worried about school. When they became teenagers, she worried about bad influences. When they became adults, she worried about jobs, relationships, money, health, and strangely, even when life looked stable, her mind still found something to fear. Her daughter had a good job. Still, Linda worried she might secretly be struggling. Her son looked healthy. Still, Linda feared something bad might happen. Her husband was fine. Still, she worried constantly about losing him. At night, the worries grew louder. The house became quiet, the lights turned off, and suddenly, the mind began moving. What if something happened? What if retirement wasn't enough? What if one of the kids needed help? What if Mark got sick? What if? What if? Mark would gently whisper beside her, "Try to sleep." Linda sighed softly, "I am trying." But deep down, she wasn't resting. She was mentally preparing for disasters that had not happened. Year after year, slowly, the body responded: poor sleep, tension, headaches, digestive discomfort, low energy, restlessness, a heaviness she could never fully explain. Even beautiful moments became harder to enjoy. Family vacations, birthday dinners, quiet mornings, part of her was always somewhere else, in tomorrow, in imagined problems, in fear. One afternoon during lunch, her daughter gently said, "Mom, can I tell you something?" Linda smiled. Of course. Her daughter hesitated. "You don't always seem happy anymore." Linda laughed awkwardly. "What do you mean? You always worried, even when things are okay." The sentence lingered because deep down, Linda knew it was true. Weeks later, during a routine doctor's visit, her physician gently asked, "How are you doing emotionally?" Linda shrugged. "Fine, I guess." The doctor smiled softly. "You look tired, not physically tired, emotionally tired." Those words stayed with her, emotionally tired. That night, for the first time in years, Linda sat quietly after dinner. No television, no scrolling, no distractions, just silence and honesty. She realized something painful. Even during happy moments, she had rarely allowed herself peace, because fear always interrupted, always whispered, always prepared for loss. A month later, a friend invited her to a local mindfulness retreat. Normally, Linda would have said too much to do, too many responsibilities, but quietly, something inside felt exhausted enough to try. The retreat was simple: quiet walks, gentle breathing, stillness. At first, Linda hated it. Her thoughts felt louder than ever. The worries rushed in: money, family, health, the future, everything. But one afternoon, the teacher said something that stopped her completely. Worry feels responsible until responsibility becomes suffering. The room grew quiet. Then came another sentence, a sentence Linda would later write in her journal. "You do not protect tomorrow by sacrificing today." Something inside softened, because suddenly, she realized how much life she had missed while mentally rehearsing fear. Then the teacher asked, "What if peace begins not when uncertainty disappears, but when you stop demanding certainty from life?" Linda sat very still. Tears quietly filled her eyes because for the first time, she understood something difficult. She had confused worry with love. She thought worrying meant caring, but really, it had only made her tired. So very tired. Slowly, things began changing, not dramatically, not perfectly, just gently. Before bed, she started writing worries down in a notebook, then closing it, as if telling her mind, "Enough for today." When anxious thoughts came, she practiced breathing instead of spiraling. When fear rose, she gently returned to the moment. This moment is okay. Little by little, life softened, sleep improved, the tension eased, joy quietly returned. Months later, her daughter hugged her and smiled. "You seem lighter lately." Linda laughed softly. "I think I finally stopped trying to survive problems that happened, and for the first time in years." She truly meant it. Lesson from the story: dear friends, perhaps there is a Linda somewhere inside many of us. A heart that loves deeply, yet worries endlessly. Please hear this gently. Your love matters, your caring matters. But worry is not the same thing as protection. Fear cannot guarantee safety. Anxiety cannot prevent pain. And mentally suffering in advance rarely prepares us for life. It simply exhausts the heart. Perhaps after 50, the invitation becomes softer, not to control tomorrow, but to gently return to today, to trust this moment a little more, to breathe a little deeper, to rest a little more fully, because peace still belongs to you, even now. If today's reflection touched your heart, please subscribe to Buddhist Healing and continue walking this healing journey with us. And if worry has quietly followed you through life, perhaps leave a gentle comment below. Healing often begins when we finally admit how tired the heart has become. Dear friends, let us gently move into the third burden many people continue carrying after 50, a burden that often disguises itself as responsibility, love, or strength, and that burden is the pressure to control everything. This burden is quiet, subtle, easy to miss, because most people do not call it control, they call it being careful, being responsible, protecting family, helping others, planning ahead, wanting the best, and often it comes from good intentions. Love, fear, past pain, or simply the deep desire to keep life from falling apart, especially after 50. Because after 50, life begins changing in ways we cannot fully manage. Children become adults and make their own choices. Relationships shift, parents age, retirement approaches, health becomes less predictable, unexpected changes appear. And somewhere inside, many people quietly tighten their grip, trying harder, planning more, fixing more, worrying more, controlling more, because uncertainty feels frightening. Have you ever noticed this? The harder we try to control life, the more exhausted we often become, because life keeps gently reminding us. Not everything can be controlled, not people, not aging, not outcomes, not timing, not change, not loss. And yet the mind resists. It says, if I just try harder, if I manage everything carefully, if everyone listens to me, maybe life will finally feel safe. Dear friends, please hear this gently. The desire for control is deeply human, especially if life has hurt you before. Especially if responsibility has always lived on your shoulders. Especially if chaos once entered unexpectedly. Control often begins as protection. Protection from fear, protection from uncertainty, protection from pain. But over time, protection quietly becomes pressure, and pressure becomes emotional exhaustion. The Buddha gently taught that suffering often grows from attachment. Attachment to outcomes, attachment to expectations, attachment to how things should unfold, how people should behave, how life should look. But life rarely follows perfect plans. People disappoint us. Children choose their own paths. Health surprises us. Unexpected seasons arrive. And the tighter we grip, the more painful uncertainty becomes. Dear friends, perhaps peace does not come from controlling life. Perhaps peace begins when we stop fighting reality. Today, we gently reflect on this question. What part of life are you gripping too tightly? Main teaching. The Buddha often reminded people that impermanence touches everything. Everything changes, Everything shifts. Nothing stays fixed forever. And while this truth can feel uncomfortable, it can also become deeply freeing, because if life naturally changes, perhaps we no longer need to exhaust ourselves trying to freeze everything in place. Many people after 50 quietly become emotionally tired trying to manage everyone else's lives. Children, grandchildren, spouses, finances, schedules, health, family problems, and often, the burden quietly grows. Not because they stopped loving, but because they never stopped carrying. Dear friends, there is a difference between supporting and controlling. Supporting says, I trust you enough to grow. Control says, I am afraid if I let go. Supporting offers presence. Control creates pressure. Supporting allows breathing. Control tightens the nervous system. And perhaps the deepest exhaustion comes from trying to control things that were never ours to control in the first place. Other people's healing, other people's timing, other people's mistakes, other people's decisions. Dear friends, you can love deeply without carrying everyone's future. You can care deeply without solving every problem. You can support someone without emotionally suffering on their behalf every single day. Reflection and explanation. Imagine trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Life often feels this way too. Relationships especially, children especially. The harder we grip, the more tension quietly enters. And often, the people we love most do not need perfection from us. They do not need control. They need trust. Patience, presence, kindness, someone who listens, someone who believes in them. Dear friends, please hear this gently. You are allowed to stop carrying what was never fully yours. You are allowed to loosen the grip. You are allowed to breathe. And perhaps tonight, you might gently ask yourself, what have I been trying too hard to control? Has control brought me peace, or has it quietly exhausted me? Sometimes, healing begins not when life changes, but when we finally soften our grip. There was a woman named Susan. She was 59 years old, living in Colorado with her husband, Daniel. If you asked anyone about Susan, they would probably say the same thing. She holds everything together. She remembered everyone's schedules, solved family problems, checked on her children constantly, organized holidays, planned finances, made sure nothing ever fell apart, and for many years, Susan wore this responsibility with pride. She loved being needed, loved helping, loved protecting her family, but quietly, something else was growing underneath that love. Exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, though she rarely admitted it. Her daughter, Emily, was 32. Independent, married, doing well in life. Yet Susan still worried constantly. She gave advice about money, about relationships, about parenting, sometimes without being asked. When Emily made choices Susan disagreed with, Susan struggled to let it go. What if this turns out badly? What if she regrets it? What if she gets hurt? Her son, Ryan, lived in another state. Whenever he took too long to reply to messages, Susan immediately worried. Was he okay? Was something wrong? Was he struggling? And without even noticing it, her love slowly turned into emotional pressure. Not only for her family, but for herself. She carried everyone's problems, everyone's emotions, everyone's futures, as though somehow it was all her responsibility. One evening during dinner, Daniel quietly asked, "Can I say something?" Susan nodded. "You seem tired lately." She laughed softly. "Of course I am tired. There's always something to take care of." Daniel paused, then gently said, "But who's taking care of you?" The question lingered long after dinner ended, because honestly, Susan did not know. A few weeks later, Emily came to visit. While sitting outside drinking tea, Emily hesitated for a moment, then softly said, "Mom, I love you," but sometimes Susan looked up. "What?" Emily smiled sadly. "Sometimes I feel like you don't trust me to live my own life." The sentence hurt deeply. Susan immediately felt defensive. "I am just trying to help. I am your mother. I care." Emily reached for her hand. "I know, but sometimes caring feels heavy." That night, Susan barely slept. Part of her felt hurt, misunderstood, but another part quietly wondered, was Emily right? A month later, at a local mindfulness workshop, the teacher said something unexpected. "Control often hides fear." Susan sat very still. Then came another sentence. "Sometimes we grip tightly not because we are strong but because we are afraid." Afraid, the word landed deeply, because suddenly, Susan saw it clearly. She wasn't controlling because she was demanding. She was controlling because she was scared. Scared her children might struggle. Scared life might hurt them. Scared of becoming less needed. Scared of uncertainty. Then the teacher softly added, "Love grows deeper when fear loosens its grip." Something inside her softened. Slowly, things began changing, not perfectly, not dramatically, just gently. When Emily called, Susan listened more, advised less. Instead of fixing problems immediately, she asked, "How are you feeling about it?" When Ryan took longer to text back, she stopped assuming disaster. Stopped creating painful stories in her mind. Little by little, life felt lighter. The tension eased. The emotional pressure softened. Even Emily noticed. One afternoon she smiled and said, "You feel different lately." Susan laughed quietly. "How? You trust me more. And honestly, it feels really good." Susan's eyes quietly filled with tears. Because for the first time in years, she realized something important. Control had not created closeness. Peace had, trust had, gentleness had. Months later, Daniel smiled at her one evening and said, "You seem lighter." Susan laughed softly. "I think I finally stopped carrying lives that aren't mine to carry." And somehow, for the first time in years, she finally rested. Lesson from the story: dear friends, perhaps there is a Susan somewhere inside many of us. Someone carrying too much, trying too hard to protect everyone, trying too hard to prevent pain. Please hear this gently. Love does not require carrying everyone's future. You are allowed to care deeply, without controlling everything. You are allowed to support others, without emotionally exhausting yourself. And perhaps after 50, the invitation becomes softer, not to hold tighter, but to trust more, to breathe more, to carry less. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is not fixing life for others. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is trusting them enough to walk their own path. Dear friends, as we gently come to the end of today's reflection, perhaps the deepest truth we can carry forward is this. Sometimes the reason we feel tired is not because life is too heavy. Sometimes it is because we have been carrying too much for too long. Invisible things, emotional things, heavy things, things no one else can see. Today, we reflected on burdens many people continue carrying after 50. Old resentment, constant worry about tomorrow, the pressure to control everything, emotional weights that quietly steal sleep, interrupt peace, tire the nervous system, and slowly make life feel heavier than it truly needs to feel. Not because anyone is weak, not because anyone has failed, but because human hearts were never meant to carry endless weight forever. Many people over 50 have spent decades carrying responsibilities: children, parents, marriage, bills, loss, disappointment, career pressure, unexpected hardships, and somehow still kept going, still survived. still stayed strong for others. Dear friends, please take a moment to honor that, because perhaps no one says this enough. You have carried a lot, more than many people know, more than many people ever saw, and maybe now. This season of life is gently asking something different from you. Not more struggle, not more pressure, not more emotional suffering, but release, rest, softness. The Buddha gently reminded people again and again. Suffering grows heavier when we cling too tightly, to fear, to pain, to expectations, to control. Not because attachment makes us bad people, but because gripping too tightly exhausts the heart. And perhaps this season of life is quietly asking, what are you finally ready to stop carrying? Not because it never mattered, but because your peace matters too, because sleep matters too, because emotional rest matters too, because the years ahead deserve softness. Dear friends, perhaps healing after 50 does not come from doing more. Perhaps healing begins with carrying less. Less resentment, less fear, less pressure, less emotional exhaustion. Less trying to control what cannot be controlled. Maybe healing begins with gentleness, with breathing, with finally allowing yourself permission to rest, permission to stop fixing everything, permission to stop replaying old pain, permission to stop preparing for every possible future, permission to whisper softly, I have carried enough. I deserve peace too. I no longer want to suffer this way. Please hear this gently. You are not weak for feeling tired. You are not failing for feeling overwhelmed. You are not broken for struggling to let go. You are human. And sometimes, being human means carrying burdens longer than we intended. But dear friends, healing remains possible. Even now, especially now, because peace does not belong only to younger years. Peace still belongs to you. After 50, after heartbreak, after disappointment, after loss, after mistakes, after all the ways life unfolded differently than expected, you are still allowed peace. You are still allowed joy. You are still allowed emotional rest, and perhaps tonight, before sleep, you might place a hand gently over your heart, take one slow breath, and quietly ask yourself, what burden no longer belongs in this season of my life? What pain am I finally ready to set down? What would carrying less feel like? Because sometimes, healing does not begin with changing everything. Sometimes, healing begins with one quiet decision, to stop carrying what no longer needs to be carried. If today's reflection brought even a small sense of comfort, please subscribe to Buddhist Healing and continue this journey of healing, mindfulness, and inner peace with us. And if there is something your heart has quietly carried for too long, feel free to gently share it in the comments. Sometimes healing begins the moment we realize we no longer have to carry life alone. May your heart grow lighter, may your sleep become softer, and may peace gently return to you, one quiet breath at a time.